thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers for putting together such a thought-provoking conference. I have been researching on television and art since about a decade now, and so my research has been taken different directions. And this is one of the topics I am mostly interested in still today, which is guerrilla television. Particularly, I'm going to focus on guerrilla television practices in the United States, and I will try to contextualize these practices in light of the 1960s counterculture movement, along with the media art practices of the same time. I will start with this work by Nam June Paik from 1963, Participation TV, which is kind of an early, incarnation of the spirit that will characterize guerrilla television in terms of reclaiming the right to be active users in front of TV rather than passive consumers, which will bring us to the marketization and circulation of the Sony Portapack and other portable devices in the mid-60s, which allowed increasing crowds of people to really develop forms of bottom-up production of moving images. A videotape recorder that goes anywhere you go. This was the slogan by Sony. It was not really portable according to our own paradigms today. It was quite heavy indeed, but you can imagine how revolutionary it was. Particularly, what was revolutionary was the possibilities this device offered. Marshall McLuhan is always, someone we need to take in consideration when dealing with issues of moving images, media, and also art practices at that time. This is a quote from his 1966 major book, Understanding Media, when he talks about a new generation of people who basically were born around the 1940s and 50s, so right after the war, what he called the TV children. And he says the TV child expects involvement and doesn't want a specialist job in the future. He does want a role and a deep commitment to his society. Definitely he is taking in consideration whatever is going on, in society, in American society. This is a society that starts to, sort of react to a kind of authoritative politics. So, for example, we have the emergence of the civil rights movement and, feminist movement as well, and many forms of movements related to the minorities. But we also have the hippie culture and the psychedelic culture, forms of culture or subcultures or countercultures, someone would say, that start from the bottom and sort of look for autonomous ways of living. One of the slogans of the 1960s counterculture is "the private is political." The attention becomes an attention towards the everyday, the singular, the individual, the struggles of normal people. And along with this focus and emphasis on the everyday and the individual, another emphasis is on the process rather than the product, which is something that, helps us read lots of artistic practices at that time related to video, related to performance, related to even to sculpture. Even minimalism could be reinterpreted in light of this activation of the user, this process that was offered to the users. Spectators who become active participants, which is something that guerrilla television does guerrilla television movement started out of this generation of TV children who really wanted to, propose alternative forms of journalism. In the end, the impact they had on the history of communication and journalism was bigger than we really acknowledge. And they produced street tapes. They called them street tapes. They really went out in the streets, filming, in this case, typical situation of police brutality, but also, the struggles of everyday people, people marching during some protests, or people, being involved in daily activities. This is really the beginning of a form of video activism that we will learn and we will see more and more in the following decades. If you think at the role of video during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, or during the anti-globalization movement and the Arab Spring, and we can go on and imagine being used also in a few years now. The guerrilla television movement started out of, theoretical assumptions. Umberto Eco was invited to give a talk in New York in the late 60s. He had titled this talk Towards Semiological Guerrilla Warfare. And in this talk, he said, cultural guerrilla fought by the scholars and educators of tomorrow. So there was always this speculative, futuristic look into what was upcoming, using the means of technological society that would reintroduce a critical dimension in the passive reception. So no longer passive reception, but the activation of the user. McLuhan, in 1970, said something similar, using different terms, also referring to warfare and the war. World War I was a railway war of centralism and encirclement. World War II was a radio war of decentralization. World War III is a guerrilla information war with no division between military and civilian participation. So they kind of, triggered this process because lots of artists and video makers identified with those words. They started working mostly in collectives. This is a map taken from a Radical Software journal and shows, the spread of video collectives in the United States. You can see from the names they had, how this approach, this, kind of warfare-related language was always present. For example, words such as action, but also, access, but also, communication, as if they were promoting a new form of communication that was really kind of based on action and intervention. This is also a time in which we see similar, topics being faced within contemporary art. For example, in this case, you see an installation by Frank Gillette and Ira Schneider, which was part of a legendary exhibition, TV as a creative medium, at Howard Wise Gallery. Howard Wise is a central figure in all these, pioneering video scene in the US, not only because he had a gallery in which he showed works such as this, but also because in 1971 he will create Electronic Arts Intermix, which is still today one of the major archives and repositories of video art history and materials. In this case, Gillette and Schneider simply placed CCTV cameras at the entrance of the gallery space, and these cameras were connected to screens inside the exhibition space, but with a delay. so that basically you get inside the gallery and then you are filmed without noticing from the back, and then you see the image of yourself being filmed from the back a few minutes later on the screens inside the gallery space. CCTV camera along with television was a major issue at that time. We see more and more surveillance cameras being placed in the public sphere, and this is something that was discussed also on the pages of the All Earth catalog, which was launched and edited by Stuart Brand, a kind of inclassifiable figure that was so influential in both the history of media art and technology in general. So this, for example, was one of the tools included in this publication. It was a book, mostly, a psychology kind of book, but still, you see, this is an illustration that was reproduced in the All Earth catalog, taken from that book, Eye and Brain, which shows, some forms of tests to see what happens when there is a delay in the CCTV system. So forms basically of control the CCTV system. How can you get a hold of it? Which is something that Dan Graham also was exploring. This is one of his performances from the late 60s, early 70s, with video cameras within, venues, academic venues or art venues, filming people and seeing live that image. Which is, an issue that is really central in the history of video art, which is about the medium specificity of video, which is the simultaneity. This is something that is discussed thoroughly by Rosalind Krauss in her major essay, Video, the Aesthetics of Narcissism, in which basically she highlights how video technologies and devices at this time were used by artists as kind of a mirror, which is something that Gillian Young also was discussing this morning about John Jonas, even though, Rosalind Krauss focuses more on Vito Acconci and Linda Benglis and other artists of the same generation. And clearly, Dan Graham was also kind of enacting this mirror dynamic. You see yourself on the screen as if it was a mirror, yet you don't recognize yourself. This creates a kind of a displacement that, produces an uncanny feeling. You are there, but it's not really you. Which is something that brings us to the guerrilla television movement. One of the major collectives was the Rain Dance Corporation. Here you see the page of the Electronic Art Intermix, founded by the same Howard Wise, showing some of the videos they produced in the late 60s, early 70s. You see there is a focus on politics, kind of a deconstruction of the language of politics as it was presented by mass media, by official television, but at the same time a focus on protests and a focus on bottom-up forms of response. For example, the activities of the hippies by Abbie Hoffman. You can see him in the lower part of the screen. Abbie Hoffman was this kind of, a key figure in the 60s counterculture. And he also provided a link between the guerrilla television movement and the counterculture itself. He talked about guerrilla television in his famous book, Still This Book, from 1971. He dedicated a full chapter to this phenomenon, saying Guerrilla TV is the vanguard of the communications revolution rather than the avant-garde cellophane light shows and the weekend conferences. One pirate picture on the sets in America's living rooms is worth 1,000 wasted words. So he put a lot of potential on guerrilla television, and he also provided the link with the counterculture movement. For example, he allowed one of these groups, the Video Freaks, to get inside the Woodstock Festival and to document Woodstock from a different perspective. We know that many people were filming Woodstock, but the focus usually was on, you know, the performances, the musicians, and the songs, and the crowds of people who got in Woodstock, transforming that festival into a major, epochal event. On the other side, the Video Freaks focused on the struggles of the people at the festival, the fact that they didn't have access to water and food, the fact that, because of the rain, there were some, floats, and the fact that, there was a kind of emergency situation going on, even though nobody really seemed to pay attention. But the guerrilla television movement has also this theoretical, base. For example, this emerges from the Radical Software publication. Radical Software was a kind of a zine or a journal published by the Raindance Corporation, 11 issues in the early 70s. These are 3 of them. Illustrations were made by several artists involved, such as Ant Farm, mentioned even this morning. The whole art catalog also had this theoretical, kind of political approach towards mass media. For example, in this case, this is another review of another major book that came out at the time, about which the whole art catalog said, the book can make a more critical viewer of you, or it can give you some skill to go with the power when you demand and get some control of the half-hour educational program about your scene. In the Radical Software journal, many theoreticians and artists and activists published their works. For example, Gene Youngblood published a text that was also going to be published in his major expanded cinema publication. At the same time, you can see from this quote of the text titled The Videosphere, he said, and I quote, "Television is the software of the earth." There was an idea that television was an actual device that connected us all and had the potential of changing the pace of history and society. But the real theoretician behind the guerrilla television movement was Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was a pupil of Marshall McLuhan, and he published essays such as Cable Television, The Raw and the Overcooked, or Cybernetic Guerrilla Warfare, which were really about, the main, they were able to identify the main, issues at stake and the main goals that these people had. For example, the motto, VT is not TV, the videotape is not television. If anything, Ryan says, it's TV flipped into itself, is like an upside perspective on television. But also the idea that information is a process, not a product. It should, trigger forms of process and forms of dialogue. And definitely another key concept was that of the feedback. In Media America, our information structures are so designed as to minimize feedback. And by feedback, these people definitely meant that kind of connection between, the spectators and whatever is going on, whatever is broadcast on the screen. A feedback is the proof that there is a connection between you and whatever you see, so between you and your own self, which is something that, video artists such as Dan Graham and Linda Benglis and John Jonas were exploring. So that you see that through images also many of these ideas emerge, the idea of the feedback, for example, from this photo montage, and the idea that, you could bring this approach right into the streets. You can use television and video cameras to empower people. Ant Farm, for example, who were architects mostly and designers, they created this media bus, which was an actual bus, which allowed them to go around and travel throughout the United States and film people and also post-produce those films, those videos inside this media bus. And in so doing, empowering, the people they met and teaching, these tools, letting other people accessing these tools, which is what Video Freaks also did when they got to Lansville. Lansville is a small village upstate New York, in which they established a commune, typical hippie commune situation, but also they established a TV network with an antenna, which was, of course, accessible only in a few meters from the actual antenna, basically creating a kind of community television. Our one shared principle was the credo of the workshop, an evolving belief that placing video cameras and VTRs in the hands of ordinary people would make the world a better, more just and beautiful place. And I will conclude by showing you this publication they made, the Spaghetti City Video Manual, which was one of a kind type of publication, because there was, a theoretical kind of dimension, but also lots of instructions, lots of information transformed and presented through these ironic illustrations of anthropomorphic, TV screens that kind of take life in order to, perform whatever was unconceivable before, breaking out the monopoly of mass media and presenting new forms of circulation of content and allowing new forms of feedback. Thank you.